Ann-Margret had been warned about working with Elvis Presley. By the summer of 1963, the warnings were everywhere, even if no one said them directly. He was the biggest name in American entertainment, managed so tightly that journalists joked his schedule belonged more to Colonel Tom Parker than to Elvis himself. He arrived with an entourage. He arrived with expectations. He arrived, people said, already finished becoming whoever he was going to be. A star so large that anyone standing near him risked disappearing into his shadow. Ann-Margret was 22 years old, already a rising star in her own right, with a career built on her own instincts rather than someone else's blueprint. She had heard, the way people in Hollywood always hear things, that this picture, Viva Las Vegas, would be Elvis' picture. That she would be there to dance, to smile, to fill the frame beside him, and not much more. People around the production had quietly suggested as much, framing her role as a supporting one in every sense. And she arrived on set prepared for exactly that. To do her job well, stay professional, and let the bigger name carry the picture. What she found in the rehearsal room was nothing like that. The first thing that struck the crew was small, almost nothing. Elvis arrived early, not fashionably early, not the kind of early that still makes a room wait. Early in the way that suggested he wanted to be there before anyone else, before the cameras, before the choreographer, before the noise of a production that by 1963 had become a machine running mostly on momentum. He was already at the piano when Ann-Margret walked in. According to later accounts from people on the production, he was playing something quiet, not for an audience, not for a take, just for himself. And when she sat down near him, he didn't stop. He kept playing, and after a moment, almost without thinking about it, she began to sing along. No one had asked them to do this. It wasn't in the rehearsal schedule. The choreographer wasn't there yet. The director wasn't there yet. For a few minutes in an empty room on an MGM sound stage, it was just two performers finding out, almost by accident, that they moved the same way. For a long moment, nobody on the crew moved to interrupt. The sound stage at MGM was usually a place of constant motion. Technicians adjusting lights, assistants carrying clipboards, someone always calling out instructions. But in that small window before the day's work officially began, the room felt different. Two voices, one piano, and nothing else. To understand why that moment mattered, it helps to understand where Elvis was in 1963. 5 years earlier, he had been drafted into the United States Army, and the world had spent 2 years without him. 2 years in which the music industry kept moving, in which new sounds and new faces filled the radio, in which the teenage explosion that Elvis had once led began to feel like it belonged to someone else. When he came home in 1960, Colonel Parker had a plan, and the plan was simple. Movies. Lots of them. Safe ones, profitable ones. Films built around songs, songs built around soundtracks, soundtracks built to sell records. By 1963, Elvis had made more than a dozen films under this arrangement. Some of them he was proud of. Many of them, according to people close to him at the time, felt like work. Competent, professional, but distant from the raw, unscripted energy that had made him famous in the first place. He showed up, he performed, he went home. The spontaneity that had once defined him, the thing that made a Memphis recording session in 1954 feel like lightning in a bottle, had, in his own words to people around him, started to feel far away. Viva Las Vegas was supposed to be another one of those films. A racing driver, a hotel singer, a Las Vegas backdrop, a soundtrack to sell. Nothing in the script suggested it would be different from the others. The cast and crew arrived expecting a routine production. Locations were scouted in Las Vegas and at MGM's Culver City lot. The schedule was tight, the budget was modest by studio standards, and the formula was familiar enough that few people on set anticipated anything out of the ordinary. Elvis had done this before. He knew the rhythm of these productions. Arrive, perform, hit the marks, go home. By 1963, that rhythm had become almost automatic. And then, there was Ann-Margret. She had grown up in Illinois, the daughter of Swedish immigrants, and by the time she arrived in Hollywood, she had already built a reputation as someone who did things her own way. Singing, dancing, acting, often all three in the same scene. Often with an energy that directors struggled to contain rather than direct. She wasn't intimidated by big names. She had grown up performing in front of audiences who expected exactly that kind of fearlessness. When she and Elvis began rehearsing together, something the studio hadn't planned for started to happen. The choreography sessions ran long. Not because anyone was struggling, but because neither of them wanted to stop. Crew members who had worked on other Elvis pictures noticed the difference immediately. He was animated. He was joking. He was suggesting changes to the staging, something he rarely did. For the first time in years, according to several people who worked alongside him during that period, Elvis looked like he was having fun making a movie. The dance numbers for Viva Las Vegas required something unusual for an Elvis film. Not just a star performing while others moved around him, but two performers matching each other beat for beat, take after take. The choreographer gave them routines that demanded real precision. And rehearsal after rehearsal, the two of them ran the numbers until they had them down. Not because the production demanded perfection, but because, by several accounts, they simply kept wanting to run it one more time. It was during one of these long rehearsal days that the moment everyone remembers happened. The room had been set up for a run-through of one of the film's central numbers, a high-energy duet that required both of them to move in tight, fast unison across the soundstage floor. The choreographer had stepped away briefly. The director, George Sidney, was reviewing notes nearby. The crew was resetting lights for the next take. And in that gap, that small, unplanned gap between official takes, Elvis and Ann-Margret kept going. They ran the number again on their own, without the cues, without the count, without anyone telling them to. And according to people who were in the room, something shifted. It wasn't just that they hit the steps, it was the way they hit them. Looser, faster, more alive than any of the formal takes that had come before. Crew members who had been moving equipment stopped moving it. Conversations near the edges of the soundstage went quiet. For perhaps a minute, maybe less, the room had the unmistakable feeling of watching something real happen by accident. When the formal take was called a few minutes later, several people on set later said it never quite matched what they had just seen. The director, George Sidney, was known for staging musical numbers with energy and movement, and he had built much of his reputation on getting genuine spontaneity out of performers under controlled conditions. But even he, according to people who worked with him on the picture, recognized that what had happened in that gap between takes was something the production hadn't created. It had simply been there, waiting. And for a brief moment, it had been allowed to surface. What had happened in that unplanned moment was never written into any script, never scheduled, never officially part of the production. And yet it became, in the memory of the people who were there, one of the most vivid moments of the entire shoot. Not because of what it was, but because of what it revealed. For Elvis, the weeks of filming Viva Las Vegas became something rare in his career during this period, a stretch of time where the work itself felt like the point again, rather than an obligation attached to a contract. People close to him noticed it in small ways. He stayed later on set than he needed to. He asked questions about the music. He seemed, for those weeks, less like a man performing a role in his own life, and more like the performer he had been a decade earlier, before the army, before the machine, before the years of films that all began to look the same. Ann-Margret, for her part, never spoke about those weeks as anything scandalous or dramatic. In the decades that followed, when she was asked about working with Elvis, her answers were consistent. Warm, careful, and clearly protective of something she considered private. She described him as kind, as funny, as someone who worked harder than people expected, and as someone she genuinely liked. She never elaborated much further than that, and over the years many people close to both of them suggested that the brevity of her answers said more than the words themselves. What can be said with certainty is this. For a short period in 1963, on a Hollywood sound stage, two performers found something in each other's work that reminded them both of why they had started. Whether anything beyond that happened, and what it meant to either of them personally, has never been something either of them chose to make public. And by most accounts, that was a decision they both seemed to want. The film itself, when it was released in 1964, became one of the most beloved of Elvis' movie career. Not necessarily because of its plot, which was simple even by the standards of the genre, but because of the chemistry audiences could see on screen. Critics at the time noted it. Audiences responded to it. And for decades afterward, Viva Las Vegas remained for many fans the film where Elvis seemed most like himself. Not a character, not a product, but a performer clearly enjoying the work. The title number, performed by Elvis on a hotel staircase surrounded by dancers, became one of the most recognizable performances of his film career. But for those who had been on set during the rehearsals, the staircase number wasn't the moment they remembered most. It was the quieter ones, the early mornings, the unplanned run-throughs, the sound of two voices and a piano in an empty room before the day's work had even begun. In the years that followed, Elvis returned to a string of films that for the most part settled back into the familiar pattern. Some were successful. Some were not. But few of them carried the same sense of ease that had marked those weeks in 1963. People who worked with him on later pictures sometimes mentioned, almost in passing, that something about that one production had felt different. Lighter. Less guarded. More like the person they had heard about from his earlier years than the version of him they usually saw on a film set. Colonel Parker, by most accounts, was less enthusiastic about the attention the pairing received. There were reports, never fully confirmed, that he worked to limit future on-screen reunions between the two stars, concerned that the chemistry was becoming a story of its own, one that existed outside his control. Whether that account is entirely accurate or shaped by hindsight, the fact remains that Elvis and Ann-Margret never again shared the screen the way they had in 1964. For the people who were on that sound stage in 1963, the years that followed brought a different perspective on what they had witnessed. Many of them went on to work on other films, other productions, other stars. But several of them, when asked years later about their time on Viva Las Vegas, returned to the same memory. Not the staircase number, not the title song, but that quiet stretch of time before the day officially started, when two performers sat down together and something honest happened in a room built for things that were not. Looking back, what stands out about those few weeks isn't a scandal or secret or a revelation that changes the official story of Elvis Presley's life. It's something quieter than that. For a brief moment in an empty room before anyone else arrived, two performers sat at a piano and made music together because they wanted to. Not because a script told them to, not because a studio scheduled it, and not because anyone was watching. That, more than anything else, may be why the people who were there never forgot it. Not because something extraordinary happened, but because for a little while, nothing extraordinary needed to.